Okay, right. So we have created our own Salesforce org, right? So, and we have created our own Trailhead account as well. Okay. So now it's time for us to start exploring Salesforce, right? So how can we configure things? How can we build things for businesses, right? So how can we make it available for the end business users so that they can start utilizing the functionalities that we are building as Salesforce professionals. Okay. So what I'll do is I'll take one business case. Okay. So I'll take one fictional company. Okay. And, so we all together also will work for a fictional company, or we should consider like, we are working for another fictional company. Okay. Named Cloud9. Okay. So it is a consulting partner. Okay. All of your teams are individual teams who are working from Cloud9 technologies to implement some of the functionality for one of the end customers, right? So that is also a fictional company. That company name is Waka. Okay. So let's keep these both company names in mind. Okay. So Cloud9 Technologies is a consulting partner. Okay. You all are working for that particular partner, right? As individual teams. And Waka is a client of Cloud9 Technologies. Okay. So we are we are going to implement something for that particular company named Waka. Okay. Based on the requirements that are coming from the Waka. Okay. So that is what the business case that we will be taking, right? That is the overall setup that I would say. Okay. So let's see what the business case is, right? What is the requirement of Waka and what needs to be done. Okay. So see, while discussing the requirements and while discussing the solutions, so we'll learn the new concepts, right? That's how we have designed this course. So we don't directly jump into the concepts. So we should know why we are doing them. Okay. We should know, even though you are learning something, right? So we should know why we are doing that, right? So for that reason, we are following this particular approach. Okay. So let me quickly share my screen. Okay. Right. So now this is what it is. Okay. So Waka is a bike manufacturing company. Okay. So what it generally do is, right, it manufactures all the types of bikes like scooters, sports bikes and electric bikes and all of that. Okay. Imagine that. Okay. So, and, they do have diverse group of employees, right? So starting from facilities, operational professionals, right? Software engineers and design engineers, accountants, legal and human resources people and all of that. Okay. So what they used to do is, right, so they used to track all of their employees and track all of their, new job openings and many other things in the Microsoft Excel and the Microsoft Word, right? That is what they were doing for a long time. And currently, that is the same thing, they're following. Okay. So since their company is growing, okay, so it is becoming hard for them to manage all of the recruitment process to Word documents and the Excel spreadsheets. Okay. So that is their problem. Okay. So if you take any of the companies, right, so how they'll work, right, so how their recruitment teams work. Okay. So let me give you a high level overview of it. Okay. So you name any company, right? It shouldn't be that manufacturing company. You name any company, right? So every company will have their HR team, right? So what they generally do, they generally look after recruitment and, um, all things related to employees. Okay. Okay. So that is what it is. Okay. So now what we will be doing is, like, we will be automating all of their recruitment process, right? So far, what they're doing, right? As they said, they're working on Word files and they're working on Microsoft Excel. Okay. I mean, like, so what they're doing on Word and Microsoft Excel is, like, they're tracking all of their open positions. Okay. And along with that, so they are seeing, like, what all employment websites these positions are posted on. Okay. So generally, so any opening, right, if any company is having a particular job opening or something like that, so what they'll do, right, they'll just simply go and post it on any of the employment websites like Naukri, LinkedIn. Okay. And Shine, or maybe, so many other portals like, Monster and all of that. Okay. So once they post that particular position, what people generally do is, like, so whoever feels like, they are right fit for that particular job, they'll start applying for those jobs. Right. This is how generally happens. Right. So, and after that, what will happen? Okay. Whatever job applications they have received, right? Whatever applications that they have received. So what they'll do, right? So they'll just simply take all of them, right? So they'll receive them as Word files, right? So their resumes and all of that. So what they'll do, they'll take those Word files and they'll just simply go through one after the other. And after that, so whatever resume, right? Whatever resume or whichever application, right? Feels like that is meeting their requirement, they'll just simply set up an interview or something like that with that particular candidate. Okay, so that is how any recruitment teams work, right? So once the interview is done, what they generally do, right? They generally roll out the offers. Okay, they generally roll out the offer letters. Okay, so if someone is selected, they'll roll out the offer letters. If someone is not selected, right, they'll just simply saying that so you are not selected and all of that. Okay, so these kind of things that they're generally tracking on Microsoft Excel and submitting this, I mean, so rolling out these offer letters and all other things, and storing all the applications and resumes and all of that in the Word files, right? This is what they are doing. Okay, so as I said, like open positions, employment on whatever employment websites they're posting, whatever applications they're receiving, like who are all candidates that are applied for a particular job, what is the status of each and every interview, right? Interview, or the feedback, what is the status of each and every interview, or the feedback and all of that, right? So what they're doing, right? So as I just told you, they're handling all of them on the Microsoft Excel and the Word. Okay, so now what they've identified is like not identified, right? Now what happened is like so so their company is rapidly growing, right? So they've witnessed the growth. And since if the company is growing, you definitely need a lot of human resources, right? So you will need people from you would need people in tech team, you would need people in human resource team, you would need people in facilities team, you would need people in operations team, right? So for each and every department, you would definitely need some people. Okay, if when the growth is high, okay, so do you think this process will work for them? Okay, so definitely they would need some kind of system or software which could help them manage this particular process in a more efficient way. Okay, so that's where Waka has reached out to Cloud9 Technologies, right? That's where they have reached out to us, and as a team we have to implement the functionality for them, right? We have to introduce Salesforce, we have to introduce them to the Salesforce world, and we have to show them how they can improve their efficiency. Okay, so that is what we are going to do, right? So where we are going to build all of this, okay, where we are going to build all of this, okay, we are going to build all of this on top of Salesforce platform. Okay, we are going to build all of this on Salesforce platform. Okay, so you may ask me like, Ishwar, you have said Salesforce is a CRM, but now whatever thing that you are discussing is entirely not related to CRM. Okay, so I've already told you, right? So on top of Salesforce platform, you can build any type of applications that you want. Okay, you can build any type of products, right? So if you ask me, you can build any type of software products, right? Software products on top of the Salesforce platform. So the same way, what Salesforce has done is, right, they have by default created some of the products like sales application, right? Sales Cloud, which is part of Sales Cloud, right? The same way they've built service application, right, which is part of Sales Service Cloud, right? So something like this, right? So there are many other default applications that we already have in our Salesforce org, right? The moment you create your Salesforce org, you could have logged into it, right? You could have already seen all of these applications, right? And we have navigated through all of these applications as well. We have switched between applications and all of that. Okay, so but we are not going to look into these applications, CRM part of applications at this point in time. Okay, first we'll try to understand how the Salesforce platform works. Okay, how all of these applications were built. The same way, like what we'll do is, right, in order to understand that in more detail, so we'll build one custom application, okay, for Waka. Okay, so which is recruitment application. Okay, which is recruitment application. Okay, so once this application is done, Okay, so we'll get to know how the platform is how the platform works in more detail. Okay, so after 2 weeks or 3 weeks, right, after you implement this particular application, after you complete implementing this particular application, you'll get to know in and out of the Salesforce platform, right, how it works and all of that. Then if you go and work on sales application and service application, it will become very easy for us to how these applications were built and how these applications works in the back end and all of that. And it will become very easy for us if we build if we have to customize these applications based on the requirements of the companies or based on the requirements of the business that we work on. Okay, let me jump to the next point. Okay, so you'll find this business case in our Salesforce Job Ready program, right? So on day 5, if you go there, you'll find this. Okay, once we are done with the class, once I publish the today's class recording, you can just simply come to this particular module and you'll be able to find this business case. Okay, now let's look into this, right? So historically, yeah, this particular point we have already seen, right? Historically, the human resource department has used Microsoft Word documents and Microsoft Excel spreadsheets to manage the recruiting and hiring process, right? That is something we have already seen, right? However, over the last 2 quarters, it's become evident that unless this process is replaced by one of the most collaborative, reliable, and scalable software application, the department won't be able to meet their hiring goals for this financial year. Okay, so that is also something we have discussed, right? Since they're growing rapidly, right? So if they still follow the same process that what they are doing, right? So if they're expecting some different results to happen, so they'll not happen, right? They also need to upgrade so that they can see the different results coming out altogether, right? So for that, what they need to do, right? So for that, they want a centralized application which can bring all of their recruiting and hiring processes together. Okay, so for that reason, they have hired us, right? They have hired the Cloud9 Technologies to solve this particular problem, right? At Cloud9 Technologies, our approach will be leveraging the Salesforce account, right? Their Salesforce account, and build a recruiting application on the Salesforce platform. That is what we are going to do now. Okay, so we are going to introduce Waka to the world of Salesforce, as I just told you, right? So Sunil is the Waka's vice president of human resources, right? So we have met him, and after meeting him, right, we have drawn the few requirements of their of that particular application, right? Whatever application that we are going to build, right? For that application, they've shared some of the requirements. Let's look at those particular requirements, right? These things we have already discussed at a higher level. As I just told you, they want to track all the positions. Okay, positions in the sense like all the openings, right? All the job openings that they're having, right? At what stage each and every job opening is there, whether they've posted it onto the website or anyone applied for that particular job, right? Are we interviewing any candidates for that particular job and all of that, right? They want to track all of those details. Okay, and all of that, and along with that, they want to track all the candidates who have applied for a particular position, right? This is also something we have discussed. And they want to track the positions, right? They want to track on what all employment websites that particular position has been posted, like such as Monster or Naukri.com and all of that. Okay, and along with that, so they want to post reviews of the candidates applications. Okay, interview reviews, like how the candidate has performed in a particular interview and what is the rating for that particular interview, how many rounds were there, like within all of those rounds, how many rounds he has cleared, what is the rating of each and every round and all of that, right? And at the end, right, if someone has been selected or something like that, right? So then they want to automatically intimate all the employees of their organization, saying that this particular person has is joining this particular team on this particular date or something like that. Okay, so those kind of things they want to do, right? So what I want you to do is just go through all of these requirements, right? I've almost covered everything, but even if I miss something, if you go through it, so you'll get to know about it. Okay, and they want to create some reports and dashboards as well, like so how many openings were there, and so how each and how quickly the positions are getting closed, and if they want to see a higher level snapshot of how the recruitment team is performing and how things are going in the recruitment process and all of that, they would need some kind of reports and dashboards, right? So we'll see those kind of things as well, right? That is also one of their requirements. Okay, so these are all the requirements that we have, and so we'll see how we can implement all of these requirements over the period of time in the coming next weeks. Okay, so right, so in order to make that happen, right, these are the things that we'll be using in our Salesforce, right? Apps, objects and fields, object relationships, validation rules, page layouts, record types, reports and dashboards, right? To import, since they are already using Excel and Word, right? They could have already generated a lot of historical data, right? So we need to import all of that data into our Salesforce, into the application, that new application that we have created, right? So for that, we'll use something called data import wizard and data loader, right? They are the tools of Salesforce with which you can either export data from Salesforce to the external systems, or you can import data from external systems into Salesforce, right? So we'll see how we can do that, right? So we'll automate few things as well, like, so the moment a position is closed, how we can post that into, how we can intimate all the employees about that, right? So if something is happening on a position, right, based on that, if you want to notify the hiring manager, who is hiring manager, right, the person who is responsible for that particular job opening, right, those people we call them as hiring managers, right? This is general HR terminology. Okay, so if we have to intimate that hiring manager on few of the changes that are happening on a position or something like that, so we'll automate all of these things. Okay, so for that, we'll use flows and all of it, right? So, and since most of the teams have access to Salesforce, right? Since they are using Salesforce, right, most of the times, all different teams will have access to the Salesforce, right? So if someone from sales is coming and making changes to the positions, or making changes to any of the interview related feedback or something like that, do you think that is the right thing to do, right? So that will definitely be a problem, right? For that reason, so we'll implement some kind of security related things as well, so that only the people from recruitment team can edit those records, right? Only people from recruitment team can do certain kind of actions or perform some certain kind of actions within that particular application. Okay, so this is what we are going to implement over the period of time, right? For the next couple of weeks. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll just log in into my Salesforce org. Okay, I'm logging into Trailhead. Okay, so I'm in my Trailhead. Okay, so one of the quickest ways to access the Trailhead playgrounds that we have created, is through your account menu. Okay, so I mean, like, through your profile drop down. Okay, if you go here, you'll find something called hands-on orgs. Okay, if you click on that, like whatever Trailhead playgrounds that you have created so far, or whatever developer orgs that you have connected with your Trailhead account, you'll find all of them here. Okay, so we have something called May 10th batch, right? So what you guys have to do is you guys have to rename it to Waka or something like that, right? So that we'll get to know, like, which org we are working on, right? Going forward, we'll take multiple business cases, right? So with different I mean, like, for different businesses, right? So in that case, what we'll be doing is, right, so we'll be creating different orgs for all of those different business cases, and we'll work those particular requirements in that particular org. Okay, so for that reason, rename your org to whatever business case or for whatever business that we would be working. Okay, so in this case, I have renamed it to Waka. Okay, so this is for this particular business we are doing, right? So I've renamed it to that. So now I'm clicking launch. Okay, once I click on launch, so it will open my Salesforce org. Okay, Waka Salesforce org. Okay, now I'm in my Waka Salesforce org, right? So now let's see, right? So we have already seen that Salesforce follows something called application driven model. Okay, where so whatever functionality that we build for a specific business process, or for a specific team or something like that, right? So we'll package it all of them together into an application, right? So right? So if you have to switch between multiple application, you'll just simply click on app launcher, which is towards top left corner. And if you click on view all, we can see all the applications, right? The same way. So we will be creating one more new application named, recruitment application. Okay. So that is where we'll build all of the new functionality, right? Based on the requirements of Waka that we have seen so far. Okay. So I've already told you, right? So we have two interfaces. One is the front end and the other one is back end. Okay. So what is front end and what is back end, right? The front end is the interface where the business users will use Salesforce, right? From that particular interface, right? They'll perform their day-to-day tasks on top of Salesforce. Okay. So whereas the back end, right, so is for our Salesforce professionals, right? That is the place where from which we configure things, and so we'll build new functionalities for our and business users, right? So that is where we'll go. That is where we should be in. Okay. So, and we'll be having access to both front end and back end. The reason why, because since we are the ones who are building things, right, we should see how those things are working. And if some of the users are facing any kind of issues, right, we should be able to, replicate that issue, or maybe we should be able to identify what exactly they are facing, so that we can fix it from our backend, right? So for that reason, we'll have access to both front end and the backend. Okay. So now we should go to our backend, which is setup, right? So instead of calling that backend going forward, as I told you, I'll call that as setup. Okay. So what I've done is I've clicked on setup, right? I went to the setup. Okay. So, but before going to build anything, right? So let me rephrase whatever things, so that we have discussed in terms of objects, records, and fields, right? So let's look into that once again. Okay. What I've told you, right? If we have to store anything in Salesforce, right? If we have to store anything in Salesforce, so what we'll do? What do we do? Right? We store that in, where do we store them? Can someone tell me where do we store them? Right? Generally in any web application. Yeah. So generally in any web application, where do we store the data? Right? We store the data in tables, right? This is what we have discussed. Okay. We store data in tables, right? The same way, right? So what do we call those tables in Salesforce? I have told you, right? So we call them as objects. Okay. We store the data in Salesforce in objects. Okay. So, right. So if we call a table as object, right? So in a table, what do we have? We do have columns, right? If this is a student table or something like that, right? So what all things we generally have for, on a student table, right? Roll number we'll have, right? If we are running a school, and if we have to store the students data, right? This is, we'll store the data, right? So roll number, their class, the student name, right? So parents phone number, right? So and many more other details, right? So what are these, right? These are the columns, right? These are the columns or data points. These are data points. Okay. Data points, right? So that data points means, or columns, right? Let's call them as columns, right? So why do we, I mean, like, what do we generally do with the help of these columns, right? We collect data for each and every student, based on their roll number, right? Their class, okay, and their name, right? Sunil, Ravi, or something like that, right? Phone number, right? Something like this. Okay. So something like this, right? These are the data points of a particular student. Roll number is a data point, class is a data point, name is a data point, parent phone number is a data point. But generally in a table, we call them as columns. But what do we call them in Salesforce? This is something we have already discussed. Fields, right? So you guys have already done the hands-on exercise as well. So probably now you should be able to know what these fields are, right? So, and then what do we call this data, right? In a table, right? So we store the data in the form of rows, right? In a table, right? Rows, right? So what do we call that in Salesforce? How do we store, right? So we store the data into records. Okay. So this is something we've already seen, right? So we store majorly the data into objects, right? Objects is the ones which store the data of a particular type, right? So, and fields are like the data points, right? So we can consider them as columns in a table, and the records are the real data, right? This is the real data. Okay. So that means if you want to store some data in Salesforce of a particular type, right? So what do we have to do, right? We have to create an object in Salesforce, right? The same way, if we want to capture some data points, right, related to that particular entity or related to that particular table, so we create the respective fields, right? So once those fields and those objects, so within that object, once those fields are created, then we'll start creating the records, right? Then we'll start creating the data, right? So this is where you can track all of your data and all of the stuff. Okay, right? So now let me clear all of this, and let me just simply show this once again in our Salesforce org, right? So say for example, I'm in service applications, right? Accounts is also one of the object I've told you. So accounts is something that we generally use to capture the customers of our business, right? That this is something I've already told you earlier. Okay. So, but you don't need to worry about all of this, like what is accounts, what is contacts, what is cases, and all of that, right? We'll see all of these objects in more detail. What is the purpose of these objects? What all fields that are there in these objects, and how we can how these particular objects behave, and all of that we'll see that in the later stages. Okay, so now I'm in accounts. If I go to all accounts, right, I can see all the accounts that are there in my org, right? So, and if I mean, like, these are like what fields, right? Columns are like fields. Okay, so, and at the same time, if I want to, these are all the data, right? These are all the records, right? Burlington Textiles Corp of America, Dickelson PLC, Edge Communications, and all of that. If I open any of the record, right, I can see more details of that particular record, right? At the same time, if you clearly observe, these are also fields, right? Type, phone, and all of that, right? So if you want to see all the fields, if you open that particular record, you can see all the fields and data, of that particular record, respective to that particular field also we can see here. Okay, so that is how an object works, and we already know that, right? So now let's see what all objects that we have to create. Now let's see what all objects that we have to create for a recruitment application. Okay, so based on the requirement that they've shared, like, we got to know that, what we got to know that, right? We got to know that they want to store information related to their job openings, right? So what is the object that we are going to use to store information related to their job openings, right? So that particular object is positions object, right? We are going to create this particular object. What is the purpose of this object? This object stores the information about the open jobs at our company, right? Which company? Waka company. Okay, so and then right, so what is the next one, right? There is another object that we'll create, right, named candidates. What is the purpose of this particular object, right? So this represents the applicants, right? Whoever is applying for our jobs. So we'll track all of those people in an object called candidates object. Okay, so the same way, job application, right? This is an object that we'll use to capture information related to the applications that these candidates have submitted for whatever positions that we have, right? All of that particular data we store and manage in an object called job application, right? Represents a candidate's application to a position. Okay, the same way, review, right? The purpose of this particular object is to track the interviews, right? Whatever interviews that we are scheduling for a particular job application, right, that a candidate has applied, and what is the feedback for that particular interview, right? How the particular person has performed in that particular interview. And the same way, if we are having 3 rounds or 4 rounds, for each and every round also we should be tracking reviews, right? Represents an interviewer assessment of a particular candidate. Okay, so the same way, there is something called employment website. Okay, so what this employment website will do is, right, this particular object stores information about the various employment websites. Okay, so whatever employment websites that we are associated from our company, right, from the Waka, whatever employment websites, right, with which the Waka is associated, like Naukri, right? So, and LinkedIn. Okay, and what more? Shine.com, monster.com, something like this, right? Say for example, this particular company has associated with some 50 job posting websites or something like that. Okay, so we'll store all of those job posting websites, not all the employment websites in this employment website object. Okay, the same way there is something called job posting, right? So using this particular object, what we'll do is, like, on whichever websites, right, a particular position has been posted, so on Naukri, how many job postings that we have posted so far, right? For the position one, say for example, we have posted on Naukri, right? So the same way on LinkedIn, the same way on Shine, or the same way on monster.com or something like that, right? So the same way we do have some other positions, like position 2 or position 3 or something like that. Say for example, if this particular position is posted onto Naukri, right, and only Monster or something like that, right? That way you can track all of those things. The same way, if this particular position 3 is posted onto only LinkedIn, and say for example only on monster.com, right? So what we can do is, right, if you select any particular website, based on that particular website, we can see what all positions have been posted onto that, right? So if you clearly observe this, right, on naukri.com, how many positions were posted, right? Position 1 is posted, position 2 is posted, the same way position 3 is also posted. Okay, so the same way, if you go to linkedin.com, how many positions were posted, right? Position 1 is posted and position 3 is posted. Okay, the same way, if you go to shine.com, only position 1 is posted. The same way, if you go to monster.com, right, the position 3 is posted and position 2 is posted and position 1 is also posted, right? This way, right, if you want to track, so the positions on and on which websites they have been posted and all of that, so we'll use this job posting object, right? So this is how we create multiple tables, and within those tables or within those objects, we'll store all of our information. Okay, right, wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Okay, so now let me go to my org. Okay, so what I'll do is, I'll first create the position object. Okay, now let's see how can we create it. Okay, so in order to do that, right, what we are doing, we are building the functionality, right? Since we are building the functionality, where should we go, right? Setup, right? Let me click on setup. At the moment I click on setup, so I'll go to the backend. Okay, so in backend there is something called object manager. Okay, if you go to the object manager, you'll be able to see all the objects that are there in your Salesforce org. Okay, all the tables, right? All the objects, standard objects, these all are standard objects. So what is the standard object? What is the standard object, right? Any object that Salesforce has created by default, right? So that those objects, we call them as standard objects. Okay, so any objects that we create to fulfill our requirement, that we call them as custom objects. Okay, so if you go to any of these objects, you can see what all fields that are there in those objects and all other stuff, right? And if you go to account object, you can see account name, account number, and all of these things are like, different fields that were created on this particular object. Okay, so now we don't want to, get into all of these objects. So our requirement is entirely different. So what we need to do now, okay, we have to create a new object, right? Whatever objects that we create, okay, to fulfill our requirements, we call all of those objects as custom objects. Okay, what do we call them, guys? We call them as custom objects. Whatever objects that we create to fulfill our requirements, we call them as custom objects. Whatever objects that Salesforce has given by default, right, so we call them as standard objects. Okay, so we call them as standard objects. Whatever functionality, right, whatever objects that we create, right, to meet our functionality, we call them as custom objects. Okay, so keep this in mind. Okay, so now we have to create a new object, right? How can you do that, right? So just you have to go to object manager, and from there you'll find something called create, right? You'll find a button named create, and if you click on this particular thing, right, create custom object, right, this is where you'll start creating your object. Okay, so now let's look at all the things that are there in here, right, while creating an object, right? So what is label? Label is the name of our object. Okay, what is the label? Label in the sense, right, the one that you see on the interface, user interface, right? Front end, right? So that is what the label is all about. Okay, what is the label for it? What is the label for it? Position is the label for it. Okay, so we are first, first we are creating the position object, right? What is the label for it? Position is the label. What is the plural label? Plural label means, so position is the one single record, right? If you are referring to multiple records, right? In that case, so which plural label that you should be using, that you would be using for this particular object, that particular thing we should give in the plural label, right? So if we have multiple positions, then we call them as positions, right? So that is the plural label of it. Okay, so that is what I have given here. Okay, so and then next comes to object name, right? You may ask me like, Ishwar, so we already have something called label. What is this object name then? Okay, so this is the backend name. This is the API. Okay, so I've already told you earlier, right? So on what all things Salesforce has built, right? Salesforce has built on three major things, right? Multi-tenant platform,
metadata, and
right? Metadata driven application development. Okay, and then what is the third one?
API.
APIs. Third one is APIs, right? I've already told you, right? So what is the purpose of these APIs, right? If you have to integrate Salesforce with any external system, so we take the help of APIs and we integrate them with the external system. And what is the metadata? I've already told you, data about data, right? So whatever data that we are creating in our org, right? All of the records and everything, that is the data. Records, right? Records in the sense, like in our student table, right? Sunil, Ishwar, Ravi, and all of those are records, right? So that is the data. But whereas the student table, right? The table itself is, a metadata, right? So the same way, whatever columns that are there in that particular table, right? Whatever columns that are there in that particular table, like roll number, data points, right? Roll number, name of the student, right? And class of the student, right? So all of these are like metadata. Okay, so these are, using this particular data point, we will be creating all the records, right? This is what the metadata, right? If we have to move this functionality, right? Whatever functionality that we are building, right? The creation of the table, creation of the fields within that table from any of our development environments. What are the development environments? I've already told you. All right, where do we develop our functionality? Where do we develop our functionality? We develop our functionality in Sandbox, right? We first develop our functionality in Sandbox, and then we move that functionality to our production org, right? This is what we have already discussed. After testing and all of that, right, we move them to production org. How do we move all of that? We move all of that with the help of metadata, right? Whatever metadata, like students, roll number, name, class, and all of those things that we have built, right? We package all of them together and we move that package to whichever org that we want to have that particular functionality, the functionality that we have built, right? So how do you identify that metadata, right? You identify that metadata with the unique API names, right? That is what this is. Okay, for each and every metadata, right? This is metadata, right? So position is a metadata, right? The name of the object, right? Whatever metadata that you create, right? Whatever metadata that you create in your Salesforce org, for each and every individual thing, right? You will have an individual API name. Okay, you'll have an individual API name. With that, like using that particular API name. Okay, so we'll reference that particular functionality, right? That particular object or that particular field or whatever it could be. Using that metadata's API name, individual API name only, we'll be able to identify that. Okay, so if we have to use this particular object, right? Position object in any of your code, or maybe somewhere if you want to package it and you want to move it to some external system, right? With which like using what you'll refer that, right? Using the API name, you'll refer that. Okay, so for that reason, right? So we'll be creating an API name for this. Okay, so this is the API name. Okay, and so for that API name, what we are doing, right? We are API name also, we are giving it as position. And the next one is description. What is the purpose of this description? Okay. So say for example, you are creating an application, okay, and within that application, you have created multiple objects and a lot of functionality. And the reason behind creating all of those things. And you have worked for 1 year for that company and you left that company. Okay. And new guy has joined. And if he has to look at the functionality, do you think he'll be able to understand each and everything that you have implemented? It will become difficult for him if there is no knowledge transfer happened, right? If you haven't transferred that knowledge to that particular individual, right? So he'll definitely find it difficult to understand what is the purpose of each and every object, like, so why those objects have been created and all of that, right? So for that reason, as a best practice, we should always give the descriptions for whatever things that we create in our Salesforce. Okay. So that when someone look into this, right, so they'll get to know, okay, this is the purpose of this particular object and all of that. Okay, so in our case, this is the description. Okay, let me copy this particular description. So what is the purpose of it? The purpose of this particular object is to store information about the open jobs at our company. Okay, so that is the requirement. Okay, so and then you can just simply leave this particular thing for now. Okay, you don't need to worry much about it. Okay, and then next comes to record name. Okay, and then next comes to record name. What is this record name? Okay, so by default, whenever you are creating an object, what Salesforce will do is it will create one field. Okay, whenever you are creating an object, right? Whenever you are creating an object, okay, by default, it will create many fields, right? So within it will create many default fields within those, right? So there is one more default field called name. Okay, what is the name? What is the API name of the field, right? Name, right? So record name, let's call this as record name. Okay, so there will be a field that by default gets created. So that field name is name. Okay, record name or name, whatever we call it, right? That is what it is. Okay, but you can change the label of it. Okay, you can change the label of it. You can give whatever label that you want to have for your end users, right? To when they open any of the records, right? So how that particular record should look like, right? So that is something that you can define in the record name, but its API name will always be the name. Okay, in the backend, as I just told you, right? For everything you can have different naming convention, but in the backend, right, there it will have some API name. The same way, right, for the objects, the same way for fields also we'll have it like that. Okay, so fields and all of that, so we'll discuss tomorrow in more detail, but for now just simply remember this. Okay, so for fields also we'll have different API names, right? So by default there will be one field that gets created, so that field name is name. Okay, so this is the API name, but the label, whatever label that you want to give, you can give that particular label here. Okay, so let me go back to so one of our records that we have in here, right? If you go to this particular record, right, the account, right? So you'll see all accounts or something like that, right? If you come here, you are seeing something like all accounts. Okay, so that means so the same way, right? So in the all accounts, if you first look at the first column, right? What is the column name? What is the name of the column? The name of the column is account name, right? This is what that particular thing. Okay, if I go here, right? So first what I'll do, I mean, like, this is the record, right? This is the account record with which the particular record is identified. So the record is identified with the name of that particular record, right? So but here, if you look at it, right, the field name is not clearly mentioned here. Okay, so but if you clearly observe that, so this particular record is represented with the name of that particular account. Okay, but if you go to the details and all of that, probably you'll find the name of the account, right? That particular field. But so using this particular name field, right, using this particular name field, those records are identified. Okay, so that is what it is. Okay, so the same way, if you go to contacts, this is another object, right? If I go to all contacts, right, so the first thing is like that I see here is the name. Okay, if I open this, right, if I go to the contact record, right, with which I mean, like, so this contact is represented or can be identified with the help of the name, right? This is what the name is. If you go to the details section, you'll find the name of, I mean, you'll find that name also here, right? That is what it is by default, right? Whenever you create an object, right, so it will ask you with what name you want to identify your records of this particular object, right? That is what we are creating here, right? So what should be the, I mean, like, what should we use in here, right? We can just simply either call it as position name, or you can just simply leave it as position, right? With whatever thing that you want to refer that, you can just simply leave it like that. Okay, so in our case, so what we are doing, right, we are naming this with the help of, right, we are naming this as position title. Okay, so using this position title, we'll identify the position records, right, each and every individual records. Okay, and then next, the data type. What should be the data type of this particular position? That that this is what they are asking, right? What should be the data type of it, right? So we'll have two types of data types here, right? One is text and the other one is auto number. You may ask me, like, what is this data type issue? Okay, so the data type is nothing but, right, so if you go here, right, so we are representing this contact with Mr. Andy Young. Okay, so what is this, what type of data this Mr. Andy Young is storing? At the end, this is a field, right? So what type of data that name field is storing, right? So this particular name field is being identified with the text type of data, right? For that reason, the name field is of type text. Okay, the same way you can give some auto numbers also to this particular thing. So what is an auto number? So auto number is something different, right? So we'll see that for the next objects that we create, like the candidate, job application, and all of that, right? So but for now, let's keep this as text, right? So the name of that particular field, right, the name field with which we are identifying this particular position, right, the data that we are going to store in that particular field is of type text. Okay, that is what we are defining here. Okay, so there are few optional features like hello reports, hello activities, and all of that, right? For now, you can just simply leave it, right? Object classification and all of that, for that's, for now, you can just simply leave all of those things and just simply click on save. Okay, so we'll see all of those things in our next upcoming classes, like what is the purpose of all of these things, and why do we enable or disable these particular checkboxes and all of that. But for now, just simply click on save. What happened, right? So our object has been created. Okay, our object has been created. So but if I have to access this particular object in my front end, how can I access that? Okay, so if I go to any of the service application or any other applications, right, let me go to marketing application, or maybe let me go to some other application, like sales application or something like that. So I'm not finding this particular position anywhere in these applications, right? So even from the app launcher, right, the beauty is you can search any of the objects, right, along with the applications, right? All apps that are there in the top, right? If you come down, you can see all the items or all the objects that are there in your Salesforce org, right? So even if you look at even if you search for it, right, if I search for accounts, I can find accounts here. Okay, if I click on that, it will take me to the accounts object. Okay, the same way we have already created positions, but if I search for positions, I don't find that. Okay, the reason behind that is, right, whatever you create in the back end, right, in order to enable it in the front end, you have to create its UI element. Okay, you have to create its what? UI elements, anything, right? It could be anything, right? So if you are creating an object, right, so in order to look at the object in the front end, right, you have to create its associated, you have to create its related element, which we do call it as tab, right? So if you create a tab, then only you'll be able to see that in the front end, right? Then only you'll be see that in the see it from the front end, from the end user's perspective, right? So for that, what we have to do, right, as I just told you, we have created the position object, right? So now if I have to create the tab, where should I go, right? Same way, right? In the setup, go to home, right? From here, search for tab. Okay, search for tabs. Okay, so this is where it is, right? If I go to tabs, right, so I do have 4 type of tabs, right? 4 or 5 types of tabs. One is custom object tabs, the other one is web tabs, Visualforce tabs, Lightning component tabs, Lightning page tabs, and all of that. Okay, so the one that we are going to create now is custom object tabs. So all the other tabs, we'll see that in detail, right, in our upcoming classes. But for now, so since we want to see our custom object in the UI, right, so which object, which tab you have to create, we have to create custom object tabs. You may ask me, right, Ishwar, if I go to the front end, I can see like leads, tasks, files, and all of those things, right? If you ask me, all of these are tabs, right? Opportunities is a tab, leads is a tab, task is a tab. But if I look at the tab section, I don't find any of those tabs here. Okay, so the reason why, because, right, so whatever standard tabs that are there in Salesforce, right? Whatever standard objects that are there in Salesforce, for each and every standard objects, Salesforce has already created those tabs in the backend. Okay, so you don't need to change those tabs, and you cannot modify those tabs. For that reason, Salesforce didn't provided those tabs related information in the tab section. Okay, so and you can create only custom tabs from here. You cannot see the standard tabs that are there in your Salesforce org. Okay, so now we have created a custom object, right? So what do we have to do in order to see that in the front end? As I just told you, we have to create a custom tab, right? So for that, what I'll do is I'll just simply click on new custom object tab, and so it will ask you, right, it will show you all the objects that are there in your org, right? Custom objects that are there in your org. In our case, right, we have only created one new custom object, which is position. Okay, what is the tab style, right? It will ask you, like, which icon should I show to your end users whenever they open this particular record or something like that. Okay, if I go to any of the objects that I have in here, if I go to opportunities, there is an icon before this particular opportunities, right? If I open any of the opportunities, I can find an icon before that particular opportunities, right? The same way, if I go to tasks, okay, there is an icon associated to the task. Okay, if I go to open tasks or something like that, if I or maybe if I go to all tasks or today's tasks or whatever it could be, right? I can see all of those tasks. It seems like there are no tasks in here, right? So but if I open any of the tasks, right, so that I'll see one icon before that particular task, right? The same way for accounts also, right? This is the icon of the accounts, and if I open the account, still I can see the account, right? So icon for that particular account. The same way, if I come down, right, for contacts also there is an icon, right? For opportunities also there is an icon, for cases also there is an icon, notes also there is an icon. The same way, right, for this particular position, for this particular object, which icon you want to have, right? That is what this tab style is all about. Okay, that you can select here, right? So for now, what I'll do is, right, I'll just simply select any of the random icon that I have here, but you can select whichever icon you want to have in here. Okay, right? So that is the beauty of it. But if you want to create add your own icon, you can do that also, right? By clicking on create in your own style, you will be able to upload any new icons if you want to upload, right? So but for now, I'm just simply selecting one of the existing icons here, right? And description, if you want to provide description, you can provide description also, right? So I'm not providing any description, but it is a best practice to provide the descriptions for each and everything that we create in our Salesforce. Okay, right, now click next, right? So you see, this is a 3-step process. Okay, so creation of the tabs is a 3-step process. In first step, you'll give the name of the tab, and you'll select the object name, and then after that, you'll select the tab style and all of that. And after that, right, since step 2, it will ask you for what all profiles this particular tab should be visible. Okay, so now you may ask me, what is meant by this particular profile? What are these profiles? Okay, now let me tell you. Okay, for each and every user that you create in your Salesforce org, right? So who are all the users, right? Sales team people, okay, marketing team people. Now in our case, who are those users? Recruitment team, right? Recruitment team members, or whatever it could be, right? HR people. These are the users in our case. Okay, so you'll have different users in your org, right? So for each and every user that you create, you need to assign a profile for him. Okay, for each and every user that you create in your org, right? Someone from sales team, or if you're creating a user for someone from marketing team, or if you're creating a new user in your Salesforce org for someone from recruitment team, right? While creating that user, you need to give a profile, right? What is this profile? This profile defines what all permissions, okay, what all permissions, or for what all things that this user is having access within your Salesforce org, right? So that is something that is defined by profile. Okay, so we'll see all of these profiles and everything in our security concepts in more detail, but for now, just remember this like this. Okay, what is a profile? Profile is nothing but set of permissions and accesses that are given to a particular user. Okay, so based on whatever profile that is assigned to him, based on whatever permissions and accesses that are there in that profile, that user will be able to access only those particular things in our Salesforce org. Okay, is that clear, guys? Is that clear? Is that clear? Just remember it like that. Is that clear so far? Okay, right. Good. Okay, so that is what the profile is all about. So in our case, right, so we see while creating this particular custom object, right, what in the second step, what Salesforce will ask you is, right, for which all profiles, right, this particular tab should be visible. Okay, if I'm just simply selecting only one profile, right, and if I'm making it default on for that particular profile, only that particular user will be able to see that particular thing. Otherwise, right, if I just simply select this and if I make it default on for everyone, then every profile in my org will be able to see that particular tab. Okay, so if I go to apply a different tab visibility for each and every profile, I can select the visibility of this particular tab, independent, I mean, like individually for each and every profile. Okay, see, if it is default on, that means people can access it. Okay, if it is default off, that means people cannot access it. Okay, if it is like tab hidden or something like that, in that case also people won't be able to access it. Okay, so that is what this default on, default off, and tab hidden and all of that. Okay, right. So in our case, we'll just simply leave it for the apply apply one tab visibility for all the profiles, right? This is what we'll do going forward, right? So when we discuss security and all of that, so in those cases, we'll see like, how we can assign it to different profiles and all of that. Okay, so but for now, just simply select the first option. Okay, and then next go to the third option, right? So in this third option, right, so if you go to our org, right, so you do have different apps, right? So you do have sales app, you do have service app, and all of that, right? On what all apps you want this tab to be visible, in all, on what all apps you want this position tab to be visible. But if you look at the marketing application, we have home tab, charter tab, campaigns tab, leads tab, contacts tab, and all of that. But so if you want to add one more tab here, right, so whenever you are creating a tab, so at the time of creating the tab itself, right, so you'll have an option to include that particular tab into whichever apps that you want to include, right? If you see here in the step 3, you'll find all the apps that are there in our Salesforce app, right? So if you want to include this tab in all our Salesforce apps, so in that case, you'll just simply check this checkbox so that it will be available for all the applications that are there in this particular org, right? So if I enable this, then what will happen if I enable this and create this tab? Then the moment I open marketing application, right, I'll see another tab named positions, on the top. Okay, but I don't want to do it like that, right? I want to create a separate application and I want to store all of this. I want to, categorize all of these tabs, for that particular application only, right? I want to keep all of these tabs into only that particular application. So for that reason, what I'll do is I'll just simply remove this particular thing, and I will not include this into any of the tabs. Okay, and then what is the next thing, right? I can just simply click on save. Okay, now the tab is created. If I go to my front end, right, I didn't included the tab into any of the application, but still, the tab is created, but we know, but the tab is already there, right? For that reason, what you can do is if you want to search for the tab, you can just simply go to view all. Okay, so why I'm like, if I search for the positions, right? If I search for positions, I can see this. So why I'm able to see these positions now? Because we have created a tab, and on top of it, right, so this particular tab has been given access to my profile as well. Okay, so in the second step, we have made it available for all the profiles by default, right? So for that reason, right, when I search for positions, I am able to see that. Okay, so now if I click on positions, right, I can see all the positions that are there in here, right? So since we haven't created any positions yet, right, there are no positions. But the same way, if I go to all positions also, I won't be able to see that, right? But if you look at the icon, right, we have an icon for this particular position created here. Okay, if I click on new, then I'll be able to create a new position. But you may ask me, right, Ishwar, we haven't created any fields yet, but how come this position title has been appearing here? So the reason why, because, right, I've told you earlier itself, right, at the time of creation of our object, right, so we have created a field named, we have created a field named name. By default, it has created a field named name, right? That is what this field is. Okay. So, but for that particular name field, we have given the label as position title. Okay. We have given the label as position title, right? So that default field we are seeing here. Okay. So if I give some name as, Salesforce developer, right? Say for example, this is the position that we have, right? So if I give the name as Salesforce developer, and if I save this, right? If I save this, right? So I can see the details of that particular record. Okay. Now the record has been created. If I go to the positions once again, I can see the record that I've just created. If I open that record, right, by default, it is going to the detail section. Here you can see all the other fields that are there along with the position title. But you may ask me, right, Ishwar, we have created only one field, but how come this created by field, owner field, and last modified by field got, came into picture? Okay. So along with this field, by default, Salesforce will create some other fields also, right? So those fields, we call them as system fields. Okay. So for every object, Salesforce creates some system fields by default along with the name field, right? Those fields are like owner. Okay. Owner means who is owning that particular record, right? Who is owning that particular record? Who is responsible for that particular record, right? So that is the owner, right? For each and every record that we create in our Salesforce org, there will be a owner, right? Without having an owner, you cannot create a record in our Salesforce. Okay. So for that reason, right, so you'll have an owner, and then you'll have another system field called, created by. Okay. What is the purpose of this system field? What is the purpose of this system field? Right. So this system field stores information related to who created that record. Okay. Who created that record. The same way you'll have something called last modified by. Here in this particular thing also, you'll have another system field called last modified by. This stores information related to who last modified this particular record, who made changes to this, who lastly made changes to this particular record. Okay. So that guy's name will be stored into the last modified by. Changes to this record, right? That information will store it in the last modified by field. But along with this, right, you are seeing some other information as well, like, when this has been created, when this has been lastly modified, and all of this, right? So for these things, right, Salesforce do have some other system fields like, created date. Okay. Created date time. Right. Sorry, created time. The same way, last modified date. Okay. Last modified time as well. Okay. But you don't see these fields directly on the UI, but you'll find the data related to those fields on the UI. But generally you don't, this is the data, right? Created date is this particular thing, and created time is this particular thing. The same way, last modified date is this particular thing, and last modified time is this particular thing. You'll find data related to these fields, but you don't find these fields on the UI or maybe in the setup also. But if you're, writing any code, or if you want to, reference those fields anywhere in your logic or something like that, you can use those fields and you can reference those fields. Okay. But you don't generally find those fields on the UI, and you don't generally find this created date, created time, and, last modified date and last modified time and all of that in the UI. I mean, like, so the field names in the UI, and the same way, like, those fields, you don't find it in the setup as well, but you'll have those fields, right? As a system fields. Okay. Right. So, and you can consider these fields as standard fields as well, right? Why we can call them as standard fields? Why? Because by default, right? By default, these fields got created. By default, these fields got created in Salesforce the moment we created these objects. So for that reason, we call them as standard fields, right? Salesforce has by default given this. So for this reason, we call them as standard fields. But whatever custom fields that we create based on our requirement, right, we call them as custom fields. Whatever custom data points that we create, right, in order to store data related to a particular record. So we call them as custom fields, right? So we create custom fields, and you will be able to identify those custom fields once we start creating those fields here. Okay, so those are the custom fields. Okay, now that is also done. Now, if say if I go to this object, right, details once again, right? So I can see something called _c at the end, right? So while creating this object, right, which name I have given? I have given the name as position only, okay, as an API name. Okay, but there is something called _c got appended to this particular position. What is the reason behind this? Okay, so since you have multiple objects in your object manager, if you have to differentiate your custom objects and standard objects, if you have to quickly identify an object as whether it is a custom object or a standard object, you can do that with the help of this _c prefix, right, that is appended to your object name. Okay, so if you look at this, you can identify that this is a custom object, right? If you don't have _c at the end of the object's name or object's API name, so then you will consider that as a standard object. Okay, the same thing goes for fields as well, but we'll see that in detail in our fields class, right? So now if I go to the object manager, right, and if you look at these objects, right, clearly, right, there is no _c at any for any of the objects. That means all of these objects are standard objects. But if I go down, or maybe if I just simply, so if I go down, right, I can see the position object also here, right? But if you see the name of the position object, there is something called _c appended to it. Just by looking at this, you can identify that this object as a custom object.
Come on.
Okay, right, wonderful. Okay, so now let's create some other objects as well. Let's create candidate object, job application object, review object, employment website, and job positioning as job posting as well. Okay, so now let me create a new object, right? Create new custom object. Okay, so now let me create another custom object as well. So what is this custom object? Candidate is the custom object. Okay, so what is the plural name for it? Candidates is the plural name for it. Okay, API name, I'm just simply leaving it like that, right? So, and then description. So we should provide description, right? As I just told you, we should provide description for each and everything that we create in here. And then next goes to, right, name of the record, right? So title of the record or name of the record, right? The default field that gets created. So what should we name this, right? Should we name this just simply as candidate name, or is it better if we can have something called candidate number or something like that? What do you prefer? If I have, if I have it as a candidate name, and if I'm storing simple data, simple text data, there are chances that, there will be two candidates with the same name, like, there could be two candidates with Ishwar, the name as Ishwar. Then what will happen? So there are chances that, I'll get confused. I may get confused because of the same name for both of those candidates, right? Instead of, rolling out offer for one candidate, what if I roll out offer for another candidate? If I'm having the names, if I'm having the same names for two different candidates, right? So the reason why, because, right, so each and every record that we create, by default, those records are identified with the help of name field, right? So that means if I'm just simply keeping it as text, right? So what will happen if I open any of the, record, right? In that case, right, if I open any of the record, right, what will happen in the top? This is the name I'll see, right? Say for example, currently I'm in the leads object, right? Say for example, this is our candidates object, right? Consider it like that. Okay, so if we have two leads with the same name, right, Bertha Boxer, then what will happen, right? You'll definitely get confused, right? Whether you should consider this one or this one, right? For that reason, what we'll do is, right, so instead of storing this as a text data, what I'll do is, right, instead of name, I'll, consider this as number. Okay, and instead of data type as text, I'll consider this as auto number. Okay, so by default, what Salesforce has done is, right, so either you can store the data into the default name field as either as a text data or auto number data. What is this auto number, right? So you don't need to do anything, right? You don't need to store any data into it. But by default, what Salesforce will do is Salesforce will automatically generate, right? Generate a number, okay? Generate a number, and it will assign that particular number to that particular record, whatever records that we create in this particular object, right? What Salesforce will do is Salesforce will automatically create a name for that particular record, right? By generating a number, and it will assign that particular number to that particular record. Okay, so that is what this auto number is all about. Okay, so in this auto number, you can define, like, what should be the display format of that auto number. I mean, like, so where that number should start, right? So this is also something you can define, right? So what Salesforce will do is Salesforce will increment that number for each and every record that we create. Okay, so if we create candidate 1, then what Salesforce will do is Salesforce will give one number to that. Okay, number like, say for example, C001 or something like that. Okay, if you're creating second record, right, then what Salesforce will do is Salesforce will second candidate, then Salesforce will assign, an automatic number like C002, right? If you're creating one more account, right, it will by default add 0003 or something like that. Okay, for third record, right? So automatically it will increment the number from 1 to 2, 2 to 3, and all of that. But that starting number you can define. Okay, if you want to start it from 1, you can give that 1. If you want to give the starting number as 10, right? So whatever records that you create, so those records will have the starting number as 10, and from the next time onwards, right, for each and every new record that you create, it will add numbers like 11, 12, 13, and all of that. Okay, so for that, so what I'll do is I'll just simply give that auto number, right? I'll select the data type as auto number. I'll give the starting number as 1. Okay, and the display format, what I'll do is I should use this kind of display format, right? So for that reason, what I'll do is I'll just simply keep it like, C dash 0001. Okay, this is what I'm just simply giving here. Okay, starting number should be 1, right? Or maybe I can just simply keep it like 000 also, right? This is just the format, that's it. Okay, either you can 10 or either you can give 10, 20, 30, or whatever it could be, but it will start from this particular number. This is only the format. Okay, so and then what we can just simply leave everything, right, like this, and we can just simply click on save. Okay, either you can click on save from the top, or you can click on save from the bottom, right? Whichever way you're comfortable, you can do that. Okay, now we have created a candidate object as well. Okay, now we have created our candidate object as well. If you go to fields and relationships, right, the same thing, like you'll see that candidate number is the label, but the field name is API name is name. Okay, and this is of type auto number. Okay, the same way created by, last modified by, an owner also we have here. But if I go to, right, so if I have to access that candidate in the UI, what should I do now? If I want to make this available for the end users, what should I do now?
Tab.
Okay, go to tabs, right? Go to tabs, and from here, right, let's click on new tab, right? Let's select the candidate object. Okay, tab style, let's select any other thing, right? So this alarm clock I'm selecting for now. Description I'm not giving anything, right? So by default I'm making it available for all the profiles, and I'm removing this from all the other apps. Okay, otherwise they'll just simply get added to the other apps, right? These positions and all are nowhere related to sales or marketing and all of those things, right? So for that reason, I'm not adding this to these tabs to those particular things, right? So now if I go to the app launcher, and if I just simply click on that app launcher, view all, and if I select for candidates, I'll be able to see that. Okay, why it is not coming up? Okay, so for that reason, what I have to do is I just simply have to refresh it. Okay, so if I go to view all, and I can just simply search for candidates, right? I can see the candidates now here. Okay, if I click on create new, I'll not find anything here to enter. Why? Because I've told auto you, number, right? Yeah, why? Because that is an auto number, right? So Salesforce will randomly generate, right? Will automatically generate a number for that. Okay, we cannot store anything into it. Okay, so for that reason, what Salesforce has done is, right, Salesforce has not given an opportunity for us to enter any data into it. Okay, so if I just simply click on save, it will create a record. It will create a record, and for that record, it will just simply add C-0001 as a candidate number, right? This field won't be available for editing. Why? Because this is an automated number, and Salesforce is generating an automatic number and storing into it. This will become as a read-only field, and you won't be able to change anything into it. Okay. So now whatever fields, extra fields that we create, though all of those fields will be starting. I mean, all of those fields will start appearing here once we create those new fields, and from then onwards, right, we can enter whatever data that we want to enter into those fields. Okay. So for now, I'm just simply leaving like this. Okay. Now let's go to the next objects. Okay. Now let's go to the next objects. Okay. Let me go to the object manager. Right. Now let's create job application. Right. I'll create these things very, very quickly. Okay. Since you already got some idea about how to create all of this, right? Job application, right? Rural label, job applications. Okay. So API names, I'm just simply leaving it like this, right? So record name, I'm not simply keeping this as job application name or something like that, right? What I'll do is, right, so I'll just simply keep this as auto number. Okay. So job application number, display J, okay, 0001 or 0000, whatever thing that I want to have. And I'm just simply giving the number as 1, starting number as 1, and then clicking on save. Okay, object has been created. Right now, let me create another object. Okay, review object. Okay, review fields and relationships. No, not fields and relationships, sorry. Object manager, custom object, right? Label, rural label reviews, right? So object API name, I'm just simply leaving it like that, right? Here, now what I'll do is I'll just simply leave this like, review or something like that, right? I'll not change this. I'm just simply leaving it like this. Okay. Here also, I'm just simply giving auto number. Okay. Review 0001, right? So 0, it should start with 1, 0001. Okay. Save. We know, right, what is the purpose of these objects and all of this. Okay. So what it is saying, invalid substitution variable. What happened? What happened? Okay, let me retry saving this. Review. Okay, so let me change this. Okay, maybe I should, let me recreate this. R 0000. Okay, let me save this. It got created. Okay, right. So why it didn't got created is because, right, so in the below I have named it as starting number 1, and within that, what is it, that format I have given the 1, right? We should not give the 1, right? We should give the 0 or something like that, whatever it could be, right? So now what's next? Employment website. Employment website. So what do we store in the employment website? Okay, employment website is to store the websites on which we'll be posting our employment details. Okay, in this case, I can just simply leave it as data type as text. Okay, so I can just simply save this. What is the next one? Job postings, right? So for this also, I'll just simply take the auto number, right? Details, create custom object, job posting, job postings, job posting number or something like that. I'm just simply keeping it like this. Okay, auto number. Or maybe we can just simply leave it like job posting or something like that, whatever it could be, right? So here, JP 0000, starting number 1. I'm clicking on save. Okay, now I have created all of these objects. Okay, now I have these objects. So now what should I do? Right? So I should create tabs also for them, right? So now let's create tabs also for them. Okay, what are those tabs? What are those tabs? For job application, I'm selecting Apple here. Next. I don't want to include this tab. save this. Okay, now I have created the third tab as well. Now let me create the fourth tab also. Right, employment website also. Next, I don't want to include this tab, and then save this. Okay. So this review and job postings are there, right? Okay, let's create for this review also. New tab, click on save. Okay, now we have created all of this tabs. Okay, for this job posting thing, right? So we won't be creating a tab. I'll tell you, right? Why we are not going to create a tab, right? So the reason behind that is because this will be a tab, that will, I mean, this is an object that runs in the background, right? So we don't want to store or we don't want to, make that visible publicly, right? I'll tell you why we have to do that, right? So but for now you can just simply leave it. Okay, so in the object relationships and all, right, in the fourth class or fifth class we'll discuss that. Then you'll get to know why we haven't included a tab for this. But for now, let's create tab for all of this 5 objects, right? The ones that we have created, right? So and then now we have created the tabs. That wonderful. But how can we make them available, right, or group them together under one single application? How can we do that? Okay, for that reason, Salesforce has given a functionality called applications, right? That is how the service, marketing, and everything were there, right? The same way we also want to create an app called recruitment app, and under that particular app, we want to keep all the tabs, right? Which are related to this particular application. Okay, so now what is an application? Okay, what is an application? Okay, application is nothing but application is nothing but application is nothing but, right, group of similar, okay, business process related, okay, UI elements brought together and made it available for the end users. Okay, this is what the definition is. Not like this is something I've created on my own, but this is what the meaning is all about. Okay, we made it available for end users. Okay, what is it? A group of similar business process related UI elements, right? So most of the times they are tabs. Okay, most of the times they are tabs, right, that you brought together and made it available for the end users. Okay, that is what an application is, right? So what do you generally do in an application, right? You'll just simply bring all the related tabs, right, together, and that's it. Okay, and you'll create it, and then it will become as an application. So that application should solve a particular business purpose, right? Solve a particular requirement of a business process or something like that. Okay, so if your business users, right, have to perform their day-to-day activities, or some particular functionality or something like that, so which is specific, then in that case, you'll bring all of them together and you'll bring all those tabs together and you'll create an application, and you'll make that application available for end users. That is what it is. Okay, so now let's see how you can create a tab, right? So the same way, if you just simply come here, right? The service application is something that is used by customer service teams, right? Whatever things that are necessary for the customer support teams, right? So we brought all of, I mean, like Salesforce has brought all of those tabs together and it made it available in that particular application. Okay, the same way sales application as well, right? So if you go to sales application, so what are all tabs or what all functionality that is necessary for the sales teams, to perform their day-to-day activities in a more efficient way. It brought all of those functionality in, together using the sales application via tabs, and it made it available for sales users. Okay. So the same way, and since we are administrators, we do have access to all the applications, but most of the times, end users will have access to only few applications based on the type of activity or based on the type of business they are in. Okay. Right. Now what we have to do, right? Now we have to create an application, and we have to include all of these tabs into that application, and we have to make that application available for end users. Right. Now let's see how to do that. Okay. In order to create an application, what you have to do is, right, the same way, right, that also should be created from the backend. Right. You will come to the setup, and from the quick find box, you'll search for app manager. Okay. Yeah, I'll search for app manager. Okay. If you go to the app manager, you'll find all the apps that are there in your Salesforce org. Right. All of these are standard apps, the apps that Salesforce has been created for us by default. Okay. So now if you have to create a new app or something like that, what you have to do is you have to click on new lightning app. The moment you click on new lightning app, it will take you here, right, a small wizard, and from there you have to create your app. Right. This is a 4-step process. Right. So now let's see what all steps that are there in it. Okay. First thing, you'll give the name of the application here. Okay. Recruitment. Okay. Recruitment is the name of the application. Okay. What is the purpose of this? Right. We should have a description, right? As I told you, for everything, we should have a description, right? So now I have added the description to manage positions, candidates, and job applications, and track job postings on employment website. This is the purpose of it. Okay. And if you have to give some icon or something like that, you can do that, right? If you come here, if you go to all of these applications, right, view all, there are icons, right? For this, there is some icon. For marketing, there is some icon. For community, there is some icon. If you have to add that image, you can add that image from here, or you can just simply give some color and you can leave it. Okay. So, and click on next. And then, right, the second step, right? So you can just simply leave it for now. Okay. You don't need to do anything, right? So I'll explain all of those things in detail when we discuss, UI and all of those things, right? For now, you can just simply leave it like this. And next goes to utility items, right? So for this also, you can just simply leave it like this, right? Utility items are like, the ones that you have in the bottom, right? If you look at this particular sales app, right, there is something called to-do list in the bottom left corner, right? Can you guys see that? Can you guys see this? Okay, this is what the utility is all about. So you can create utilities, different utilities, and you can add those utilities as well, right? Wherever people go in this application, right, they'll still have this utility available for them, right? To do some kind of quick actions, right? Quickly, if they have to perform some kind of operations or something like that, then you'll just simply add the utility, add them into the utility, and they can just simply click on that and do whatever they want to do on a quick basis and all of that. Okay. So that is the purpose of this utility, right? So do you need any kind of utility to be added to this at this point in time, right? So we don't need that. Okay. So for that reason, I'm just simply leaving this, and we don't have, when we didn't created any utilities also for us, right? You can just simply leave it like this, and you can just go to the next step. Okay. Which is the the final but one step, right? So in this, right, you will define, you'll select what all items in the sense, what all tabs that you want to have in your application. Okay. So these are all the tabs that are available. I've told you, right, even though we cannot see the standard tabs from the tab section, but still they are tabs, right? They are available for use, right? Wherever you want to include it into any of the applications or something like that. Okay. Right. So in our case, right, so what all tabs we have to include, right? What all items we have to include? Can positions tab. Okay. And then right, candidates. Candidate number is a field body. Candidate is the object. Okay. Candidates is a tab. Job applications. What more we can include?
Employment website.
Employment website.
Under review.
Right. Okay. Right. So these are the ones: positions, candidates, job applications, employment websites, and reviews. Okay. So I have included that. In the last step, right, it will again ask you for what all profiles you should, this application should be available. I've told you profiles are like the set of permissions that we provide, right? So at the time of creation of tabs also, it has shown me like it has shown us like, for what all profiles this particular tab should be visible. The same way, right? For what all profiles this application also should be visible, right? You have to select all of those profiles from here. Okay. In our case, right, so by default for us, right? So the profile that is assigned is system administrator. Okay. What is the profile of our user? Our our user account by default? System administrator.
Admin.
Okay. So whatever user that Salesforce creates while creating this account, right, for us, right? So that particular user will have Salesforce administrator profile. Okay. But whatever new users that you create in the org, for them, you can give whatever profile you want to give. But since we are the administrators, right? Since we are the ones who are administering this org, we should have access to everything in the Salesforce, right? For that reason, we have given the Salesforce administrator profile by default. Okay. So this is our profile. Okay. Now tell me, right, which profile I should include here, right? So we haven't created any profile for the recruitment team, and we didn't created any recruitment users also so far, right? We haven't created any team members from recruitment team also into our Salesforce org. For now, we are simply developing the application, right? So in order to, make this app visible for us, what should we do now? For which profile we should make this available?
System administrator.
System administrator, right? So in order to make this available for us, we have to search for system administrator, and we have to add that particular profile, so that from next time onwards, whenever system administrator is logging in, right, if you go to apps, he'll be able to see that. Okay. So not yet, but so once the application is created, then he'll be able to see it. Okay. Now click on save and finish. So once you click on save and finish, while your application is readily available, okay, you can see that from here. Where is it? Where is it? Recruitment. So if you don't see that, refresh it. Okay, if you come down, here is it. Okay, let me click on sort by last modified, right? If I click on this, this will come to the top, right? Why? Because all of the records that are there in here, all of the data that is there in here, it got sorted by modified, last modified date, right? This is the one that I've recently modified, right? So that reason this came to the top, right? So this is what it is, right? Recruitment application, the one that we have just created. Okay. Go to our UI front end and let's see how that looks like. Okay. If I go to the app launcher and if I click on this view, view all, right? This is where I can see this recruitment app. See, this came in, right? So if I click on that recruitment, now it will take me to the recruitment application where I have positions, candidates, job applications, employment websites, and reviews. How simple is it, right? We can create applications this